Week 4, nutrition. You have a lot of materials to go over this week. This won't be a very long lecture. I'm just going to connect some dots and leave you to read through the material this week as we explore nutrition. And some of it is, as you imagine, we'll look at macronutrients, but some of it also is looking at, in this lecture as well, the importance of food as a mediator between human interaction. And when you guys look through the Mediterranean diet, I hope you, as you're thinking through that, very simple article, but is the Mediterranean diet more than just food, right? Again, this reductionist approach that we tend to have on things, especially in modernity, we tend to focus on, okay, I gotta have more omega-3s. I gotta have more oil in my diet, right? Omega-3 oil, unsaturated fat, polyunsaturated fat. I gotta have more olive oil in my diet. This is the key to health. But then you eat food alone by yourself all the time. Am I missing out on the interaction, this more holistic look of what the Mediterranean diet is? It's not just the food, right? It's the person in front of you, releasing stress, laughing with them, whatever it may be. Just the eye-to-eye contact's a big deal in terms of promoting longevity. Okay. All right. So, you may have heard this quote, "We are what we eat." I thought I'd just mention this. This is also out of modernity in response to the revolution in 1848, which was basically a Marxist attempt at a Marxist revolution of Europe, and it failed, obviously. And so, Feuerbacher has had some contention with religion, and so it's probably more philosophical than the way we frame it today. Is like, if I eat cheeseburgers, I have a cheeseburger, and so I'm unhealthy. If I eat, vegetables, I'm healthy. Scholars debate over his real meaning, but I thought it was worth mentioning, framing this lecture. Anyway, let's start here, though, with diet. I happened to mention just a minute ago is the importance of relationship. Like, food is a great mediator between talking to somebody, relationship to building. This was a study done in 2020, and it used a survey instrument that determines quality of life, how you feel about life, right? And there's some subcategories associated with it: mobility, self-care, usual activities, pain, discomfort, anxiety, and depression. These are subcategories with this EQ-5D index, okay, that's generated from the survey. You can see these green bars represent the total index, right, the survey outcome. Across the x-axis is how many times per day. This is from a large database that this information was mined from. But you can see that the 0 time per day, 1 time per day, two or more times per day pertains to how many meals were spent with somebody else. And if you just move from 0 times per day to 1 time per day, you can see a significant decline in some of these subcategories, right? Like anxiety and discomfort, right? Some of these negative things. And you see a total increase in the composite score for their survey. So in other words, a good thing, right? There was a significant increase in quality of life. If we just made it real general, as a result of having 1 meal per day with somebody. It could be any meal, it could be with anybody. But the point was that human interaction was very important for how somebody feels. Okay. Now, as we kind of look back into modernity, what has changed about meal times? Do we have more meals today than we did in the past, or less, like pre-modernity? Well, you could even see through modernity, there's probably still quite a few meal times that were observed, right? In fact, a lot more than today. Like if you look at, let's say, through the 1800s, through the Victorian era. What we're seeing now, though, is a lot of things come in and lag, right? So a lot of the ideas and the revolutions that occurred during modernity now are starting to manifest themselves in today, okay? Whether that's a move towards more of an urban, suburban lifestyle, it's a little bit faster. You have if you have two parents in the home, both of them are working, maybe as a result of the sexual revolution, maybe as a result of a necessity, because of economic pressures, as a result of some of these ideas that came from modernity, right? And those ideas from modernity may influence the federal government and the state governments, right, and so on and so forth. So, taking this holistic view is, why are we having less meals per day than before? Okay, we'll look at food quality briefly in just a little bit. This is part of the class is not only, hey, we have obviously meal timing, or the number of meals spent per day is really important to how people perceive their quality of life, at least what we know so far, and you'll read more about that this week. But I'll read more broadly in this idea of meal timing this week. But what are the connections with modernity? And obviously the connections to wellness are probably a little bit more clearly seen. Let's look at some dinner time rituals and see if what impact they have on BMI. So this is just a little interesting study. It's not looking, okay, we're assuming we're having dinner time, or a meal time, but this happened to be dinner time in this particular study. What are some important characteristics of dinner time, perhaps, that have an impact? And so we're just going to focus real quickly on this study. Keep in mind correlations. These are isolated. They did do regression analyses, and overall, all these variables didn't have real strong prediction strength on BMI. Okay, so I think it's interesting to look at these relationships, especially among each other, to see which ones may be more interesting. But the point is that these aren't the only things that are determining the effect of a dinner time on BMI. That shouldn't be a surprise. Okay, I still think they're interesting to talk about, though. Now, I just want to make sure we frame this so when you see these, like, oh, don't make a cause and effect mistake. Right? We're just looking at relationships here, and then we could dive deeper if you want to. There's a fair amount of research on mealtime and the importance of it and the construction of it and how it relates to health. But this one was just kind of a simple one to look through. All right, so if we look at parents' BMI, and we go to results that are look for ones that have two asterisks by them, because there's less likelihood that these correlations occurred by chance because of a p-value of less than 0.01. If you know anything about stats, it's okay. Let's just stick with these though. These are the most meaningful, at least statistically, in this little set here. So if you go to dining room environment, and you'll see this across the board, is eat in the kitchen or dining room. Except for boys, this was very important. So where the meal was eaten had an important relationship with the parents' BMI, and we'll see for girl and child as well. So there's parents and mothers. We're just going to look at parents together because see the mothers is pretty close to the parents. So eat in the kitchen or dining room. Okay. So what that means is that if the answer was no, 0, then the BMI was higher. All right. The answer is no, the BMI was higher. So the study was really focused on kind of TV watching and not having that human interaction and slowing down and eating a meal together. And so not as part of a correlation here that shows up is where you eat the meal is important. In other words, eating in a place where the TV is not present. Now, if you go down and it says eat with the TV on, even if the TV's on, and they're not watching it, there's a 0.23. Notice that's a positive correlation, meaning the BMI is higher when the TV is on as a result. So if you scoot over now to the child's BMI, you can see another negative correlation, eat kitchen or in the dining room. Again, these aren't real strong correlations, but they're still interesting. These stick out in this data set. And then you move over one more category to girls, okay, BMI. You'll see again that the correlation actually gets a little bit stronger, again, where the meal is eaten is important. So, again, lower BMI if the meal was eaten in the kitchen or dining room, okay? For boys, this wasn't significant 0.05, but it's the only one that had a significant correlation. It's in the 0.3 area, which I think is interesting just to consider, is the boys' BMI it was important for boys to remain at the table in terms of BMI. At least of these other variables, it was the most important. It had the strongest relationship to a lower BMI in boys. So that's kind of interesting, the difference between boys and girls when it comes to dinner time rituals, at least in a very casual way here, looking at these relationships, these correlations, that it may be where the meal is eaten may be more important for girls. And I say may. And the fact that there's some control over how long dinner is and there's maybe not coming and going with dinner table is more important for boys when it comes to their BMI. Okay. Now, again, taken as a whole, you look through this, and if all these were 0.02 and nothing mattered, then maybe nothing to dinner time rituals. But there's some relationships that there's a trend in this data that tends to point to some important aspects of the mealtime activity, and even if it's the kitchen or dining room, notice. So it's more about not being in front of media, right? Not being in media, like some sort of media, like it's a phone or a TV in this case. That's what's really in play here. Okay, that is slowing down and face-to-face interaction. And you can see this if we start to build a picture of all the research that we have. This is the picture that's forming. Okay, now I'm just going to highlight this briefly. Is a study that was looked at ultra-processed foods. So when we look in the research literature, not surprisingly, foods that are home cooked or have mealtime, that dinner time is going to be better quality food. Whereas food not in those times is going to be usually, I call it space food, and I eat space food too, but bars and tubes and our fast foods and things are prepared for us. Obviously, there's if you go to a restaurant, you can get a range of food, but whether it's ultra processed or not. But you'll see in this particular study the definition of ultra-processed foods. Processed meat is at the top of the list. We've seen this link between colorectal cancer and processed meat quite a bit. So let's just look briefly at this study. To start, I just want to point out that this was a study, and this is I've seen this study done quite a bit. This arrangement, right, the structure in studies often very common when you look at some sort of food behavior. In this case, ultra-processed foods. And if I scroll back up for a second here, you can see some of these ultra-processed foods, the percent of contribution of a particular food that fell into this ultra-processed food group. So processed meats, sugar, sweetened beverages, dairy products. If you look down here, includes custard, ice cream, milkshakes. So the stuff that you suspect that we call ultra-processed, unhealthy food. So then we have these quartiles that were defined by how many servings per day of ultra-processed food, okay, were ingested. So the first and the lowest was less than 2 servings. The second is basically 1 to 2. The next one is 2 to 4. And then there's 3 to 4, and the way they do this always confused me. And then the next one is over 4. Okay, I think we covered all the gaps there. Okay, so essentially, quarter 3 and 4 are the ones that consume the most ultra-processed food. So there's some other figures in there that are really interesting, but this one I think summarizes it well. So the first and second quarters, so in other words, the 2 and less, okay, processed foods consumption per day. You saw a follow-up of 14 years in this particular cohort, and total mortality was obviously different between that third and fourth quarter and the first and second, at 14 years. Okay, and you really started to see it separate. Now, I'm just using my eyeballs here. Okay, but you can see that maybe around year 7 or 8 is when you start to see some separation between these two groups. So you got 8 years to eat no, that's not what this means. But really interesting, not surprising, again, the ultra-processed foods leads to a higher mortality risk. And that appears to be that cutoff is around 2 servings per day, which is not far off from what we see with colorectal cancer risk and red meat consumption. So I at least had to talk about macros a little bit, but I'm trying to make this connection between, I'm not trying, I think there is a connection between the quality of food that we have related to the mealtime. And going back to that Mediterranean diet, higher quality food, sit-down meal, human interaction, that's where the power in the Mediterranean diet is. The reason I'm kind of attacking the Mediterranean diet, I see it as pushed as, if I follow the Mediterranean diet, I'm automatically going to be healthy, but then I don't ever have a human interaction. Now, does the olive oil and the omega-3s, are they helpful for health? Sure. But remember, we've taken a reductionist approach now to this. We take one part of the engine, remember back to our complexity talk, beginning of the class, and said this part of the engine is really important. It's the omega-3s. So pump your body full of omega-3s, then all your dreams will come true. Okay? Well, you're missing the holistic view of slowing down and the interaction of the diet itself. That therein is the important interaction that may produce the greatest effect of the Mediterranean diet, not the olive oil. Okay, so to finish up, just a study to kind of drive home this point, isolation is a bad thing. So a study by Wang et al. In 2022, just recently, and look at this cohort of individuals and broke down this cohort by basically isolation or non-isolation. So if you look like the headers here, face-to-face contact with co-inhabitants, people who live with, face-to-face contact with non-co-inhabitants, people outside of their house, face-to-face contact by technology of some sort, okay, mail, telephone, all right, and even club organization contact. The blue line represents the referent. So the referent is like the first one is 3 or more people face-to-face contact within your cohabitants. So you have a bigger household. Face-to-face contact of 1 time or more per month. That's not very much. With people outside your house, and then non-face-to-face contact, based some sort of technology. Okay. If you go all the way down to the bottom of each category, so the face-to-face contact with cohabitants live alone, you can see a fully adjusted hazard ratio of 1.24, so 24% increase in all-cause mortality as compared to people who are around 3 or more people in their house. Face-to-face, no such contact at all within a month, 60% increase. Okay, even if you had less than 1 time per month, so occasionally, you can see the drop off there to 7% increase. So again, extreme isolation, not a good thing. If you go down to non-face-to-face, and you see that same kind of gap between no such contact and less than 1 time a month. Okay, obviously less than 1 time a month is kind of a weird number, right? Is it 1 time or not, right? But we'll assume it's less. It's not no such contact. It's just less. Okay. And then we go down to club organization. You see the same slight increase of less than 1 time a month. And then you have a composite social isolation score between all of those. Now, what does this mean? Okay. Well, even if these numbers are, you don't buy all the numbers completely, you see a trend there that isolation is a bad thing, right? And having contact and meeting people face to face, in particular, especially people outside your house, like more interactions than your custom, is a good thing. Okay, is a good thing. Food is a great mediator of that relationship. If we look like just to finish here, cardiovascular disease only, you see a similar trend. Notice in the face-to-face contact with non-coinhabitants, no such contact. Okay, it's 2.05 or adjusted 1.91, so 91% increase in CVD cause mortality. That's a big jump. Okay, if you look at even just less than 1 time a month, which is again kind of a wonky number, but even some contact, I would say, that's significantly reduced. Okay, so what does this mean? Well, food is not just macros. Even I told you the ultra processed food is a bad thing. Even if you had ultra processed food once a day and you had it with somebody else, you ate the meal with somebody else, that you could argue maybe that's a healthier setup than eating healthier and being isolated all the time. Okay, just showing you the weightiness of being around others. And I think for the most part, I think about some of the great meals I've had. They've always been with somebody else, whether it's with my wife or my wife and kids or with friends or whatever it is. That's when a meal really has been good, right? Food tastes better. Everything's just better because of the company that you're keeping. And conversely, it can be pretty awful if you have bad company. Okay, food can't make up for that either. So don't underestimate the power of food, though, to facilitate interactions. And then when we look at modernity now, what is modernity and the pace of life and the change and urbanization that you'll look a little bit into, and what has that done to the family structure, and therein what has that done to the ability to have a mealtime and to spend meals together? What has technology done, if we allow it, in terms of having meal times and face-to-face interactions with one another through the medium of nutrition? Okay, if you think about what most nutrition is now, it's always it's a big statement. It commonly is boiled down to macronutrients and again how much of this you eat, how much of that. I don't hear too many people saying, hey, it's not about that. It's about meeting with others. But then, well, I don't have time to do that. Why? Because of some of the influences of modernity. Okay. And so in order to really see change, and this nutrition part of this class is a little bit more into the actual interactions of the dimensions of wellness more than anything, but you can see the impact of modernity though, how it's touching the pace of our life. Again, the expectations of life, the economic challenges of life, the change in philosophy about 2-parent versus 1-parent homes. I'm not saying that some people don't want that. Some people do. It doesn't matter the desire there. The reality is not having 2 people at home can make it more difficult because of shift changes. I mean, I grew up in a family with 2 different shifts. That's difficult then to have that face-to-face interaction with meals. And why those shift changes take? Well, industrial revolution, right, so on and so forth. I hope you see those connections. All right, I'll see you guys in the next video.